Good day and welcome to today's program. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the question-and-answer session. You may register to ask a question by pressing star and 1 on your touch-tone phone. It is now my pleasure to turn the conference over to Sue Walitzky. Go ahead, your line is open.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. I'm Senator Cardin's Communications Director. I'm going to turn it over to him in just one moment. I wanted to let you know who else we have on the call today. We have Champ McCullough, President of the Maryland chapter of the Associated General Contractors. We have John Kane, President and CEO of the Kane Company. And we have Stephen Weissenberger, Executive Vice President of the Mechanical Contractors Association of Maryland. I'm now going to turn it over to Senator Ben Cardin.
Well, Sue, thank you very much, and I want to thank my friends for joining us on this very important subject, and that is the confirmation proceedings for Tom Perez. Some good news, Tom Perez was reported out of the authorized committee today, so we should have his nomination on the floor shortly. At least we hope that will be the case. Unfortunately, it came out on a party line vote, and I say that's unfortunate because that's not Tom Perez. Tom Perez has been a true professional. I must admit, I've known Tom Perez as a friend. I have known him for a long time. I remember with fondness his days on the county council in Montgomery County, where he really understood community issues. And the one thing that always impressed me about Tom Perez is his ability to reach out, understand all sides of an issue, and provide leadership to get things done. He is so qualified for this position, and you're going to hear from some business leaders in our state and some labor leaders. He was Secretary of Licensing and Regulation. Now, that's comparable to the Secretary of Labor at the national level. And he was known, in the way that he ran that agency, to be fair. And he has support from organized labor. He has support from the business community. And I thank the Maryland institutions representing both sides for speaking out for Tom Perez and urging his confirmation because of the fair manner in which he has conducted issues that are very comparable to what he will need to do as Secretary of the Labor. I also had the chance to chair his confirmation hearing when the Senate confirmed him to be the head of the Civil Rights Division. At that time, I was on the Judiciary Committee, and Chairman Leahy allowed me to chair that hearing. And it was an extremely difficult process because, not Tom Perez, it was difficult because the Department of Justice had so many problems under the previous administration. The Department of Justice, particularly the Civil Rights Division, had a long history under both Democratic and Republican administrations as being truly professional and looking out for the rights of all of its citizens of this country. That was not the case in the previous administration with the Civil Rights Division. And what Tom Perez did immediately upon being confirmed was to reach out to all the professionals within the agency to let them know that he was going to reestablish the reputation of the Civil Rights Division as being the watchdog for civil rights in this country and doing it in a way that protects all Americans. And that's exactly what he did. He has reestablished the reputation of the Civil Rights Division, and he has improved dramatically the morale of the professionals at the Department of Justice. He has a strong record of accomplishment, record settlements in the Department of Justice, reestablishing the Department of Justice as principal player in many of the civil rights areas. He improved morale. So his record is really clear about every responsibility he has taken on, whether it was an elected official in Maryland, in Montgomery County, or at the state of Maryland with Secretary of Licensing, or at the federal level with the Civil Rights Division. Of course, he has a long record dating back to his days with Senator Kennedy here in the United States Senate. So what are all these attacks about? And I've really got to point this out because I've looked at every one of the attacks that have been made against Tom Perez. And I must tell you, they're without merit. Now, I understand. I'm a senator who supports Tom Perez, so maybe I'm a little bit, maybe he's not as objective as some would say. But look at the Inspector General's report. That's an independent office. they've looked at every one of the concerns. They've reviewed the operations of the voting section of the civil rights. They've looked at many of the issues that have been brought to the attention by Tom Perez's opponents, and have found in every case that they're totally without merit. There's been some accusations made about how he handled one particular case. Well, look at the facts. There's been an independent review of that, and Tom Perez did not make the judgment in that case, and everything he did in that case was appropriate, and that's been confirmed. So there has been a total independent review of every one of the areas, and there's no basis for it. One last point, and that is Tom Perez is entitled to an up or down vote. I don't think we're going to find a more qualified person to serve as Secretary of Labor. He is a true public servant, well qualified, well positioned, but he's entitled to an up or down vote. And we've seen during these last couple of weeks obstructionist tactics that have been used. The United States Senate needs to carry out its constitutional responsibility and vote up or down on this nomination. President Obama is entitled to have his team in place, and the Senate is responsible to give its advice or consent, and that should be done without any further delays or any other dilatory actions. And I hope the Senate will confirm him shortly.
Champ?
This is Chan McCulloch. I'm the president, paid exec for the Maryland chapter of the Associated General Contractors of America. And my experience with Tom Perez is, as Senator Cardin has described, while he was Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation. I've not had the opportunity to have any interaction with him in his role in the Civil Rights Division, but my experience with him while he was the Maryland Secretary of Dollar, which is what we call it, is really exactly as Senator Cardin described Mr. Perez. He is incredibly smart, number one. You can't avoid respecting the man's intellect. Number two, he is very open to discussions from all points of view around an issue. And the issue that we were dealing with at the time is a pretty emotional one. It's called workplace fraud, but basically the issue is some employers will treat their employees as if they're independent contractors so that the employer can avoid paying withholding taxes, unemployment insurance, workers' comp. If you're an honest business person, if you're like my members, you really resent having to compete against a company that behaves in that fashion. So legislation was introduced in 2008, wasn't successful. And before the 2009 session, Tom Perez took the leadership to convene a work group of a very broad spectrum of opinions. I mean, there were some diehard opponents to doing anything about the situation, and there were some, frankly, pretty bomb-throwing advocates for it as well. But there was a broad spectrum of opinion represented. And Mr. Perez very thoughtfully, methodically, carefully worked through all of the issues that were presented from all points of view, trying to achieve consensus. Now, recognizing that consensus is really not possible on every aspect of a controversial issue, he nonetheless, frankly, slogged through. We had multiple meetings, and he never lost his cool. He never became belligerent. He always listened patiently to points of view, some of which were very extreme on either ends. And the net result was that he was able to bring together the broad business, union, advocate community around a piece of legislation for the 2009 session. Now, there were disagreements about some of the details. There were a series of hearings in Annapolis, and Mr. Perez just continued to demonstrate his willingness to consider both sides. But I will say he is a magnificently articulate advocate for a position or point of view once he's convinced that that's the right way to go. So, frankly, did I get everything I wanted out of this? No. on balance, was it fair? Yes. And I think there's no higher commendation that I could give Mr. Perez beyond saying that he is scrupulously fair, incredibly smart, and very hardworking. I think he'll be an excellent Secretary of Labor.
John?
Yes, my name's John Kane. I run a series of logistics and transportation companies in about a 4-state area. I knew Tom in a multitude of different ways. One, when he was on the county council in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where I reside, I'd have breakfast with him once every 4 or 5 months. We just kind of toss issues and thoughts around. And I always found Tom, while I would not agree with him, probably 60% of the time, maybe even 70 sometimes, he would tell you the honest reason as to why he believes the way that he did. And as I joke with Tom, you're one of the few people I know who I don't agree with for the majority of the issues, who will only stab me in the front, never in the back. I don't say that in a negative way, but he's very forward, thought-thinking, forward-thinking, and progressive thinking. And remember, Maryland is a very democratic-ruled state. I also have another hat that I wore on nights and weekends, which was, for 4 years, I was chair of the Maryland Republican Party. So, as Champ mentioned, I'm very familiar with the proceedings and the difficulties associated with legislation that was passed. I would sit with Tom in an unofficial capacity from an employer standpoint, but I also had an issue with from the competitiveness aspect, because I compete against people who would use these illegal relationships where they would call these folks independent contractors and not pay their taxes, not pay the proper wages and benefits associated with it. And I got to the point where I was like, Tom, the worker is getting abused here because they don't have rights to stand up and say, I should be paid what a legitimate worker should be earning. And they were taken advantage of by unscrupulous employers. And so from a fair competitive standpoint, Tom listened. And as Champ said, I didn't get all what I wanted out of that piece of legislation, but I got more than I did before it started. And by being the chairman of the Republican Party of Maryland, where oftentimes our caucus would meet in a phone booth, if you get my drift, I would have to continue to reinforce to our Republican supporters that the street in Annapolis has been there 300 years. It's called Compromise Street. And if you hold out for everything that you want, you'll get nothing. And so for the sake of the pureness of some of their thoughts and processes, they would give up the plausible. And Tom was always able to kind of cut through a lot of that. They didn't agree with him, and they would yell at me for supporting him. When he went to the Department of Justice, I was one of the few Republicans that wrote a letter in support of him, because I think he's a very fair and balanced person. Republicans were not in office. The Democrat was. If you think that the Democrat is going to pick a Republican who's going to get, it's wanting to pick a Republican, Department of Labor or Justice, it's not going to happen. So the president's entitled to pick his own team, and I think the up or down vote that Senator Cardin mentioned is spot on. He should be given the opportunity to have an up or down vote.
Okay, lastly, Stephen?
Yes, this is Steve Weissenberger. I am the Executive Vice President of the Mechanical Contractors Association of Maryland. I follow two very eloquent speakers in Champ and John, and they have, I think, outlined Tom Perez's qualifications very well, so I will be brief. Mechanical contractors, as all contractors, tend to be a very conservative group, and I represent well over 100 contractors, and they're a conservative group. Yet, unquestioned and unqualified, we support Tom Perez for Secretary of Labor. So I think that speaks volume for who he is, what he's done for the state of Maryland, and what we hope he can do for the United States. And we only hope that the Senate does a good job, does the right thing, and does the right with the vote, gets the right vote, and gets Tom Perez out of the Senate. So let's hope that the right thing gets done and Tom Perez gets a good nomination out of the Senate.
Okay, Clint, if we want to open it up for questions.
Absolutely. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star and 1 on your touch-tone phone. You may remove yourself from the question queue by pressing the pound key. Again, star and 1 to ask a question. We'll go first to the site of John Gramlich with CQ Roll Call. Go ahead, your line's open.
Great, thanks. Senator Cardin, I was just wondering what you take away from this morning's panel vote when even someone like Senator Kirk, who is often sides with Democrats on things, voted against Tom Perez. I mean, what do you see that suggesting for the floor vote and picking up additional votes to get over that 60 vote threshold that it looks like Tom Perez is going to need?
Well, first, I would be extremely disappointed if there is a filibuster of this nomination. There is no justification for a filibuster on this case. We've heard Republicans and Democrats talk about how the Senate has to take up issues and resolve issues, and a filibuster should be reserved for extremely rare circumstance. It's certainly not appropriate in this case, and it's been extremely rarely used in regards to a presidential cabinet position. So we hope that will not be the case. And then secondly, really echoing the point that John Kane made, but also my other two colleagues that are here, what this town needs is someone who will break the partisan gridlock. And I think this morning's vote is an indication of all too often we see partisanship here in Washington, and that's wrong. We need someone who can bridge the Democrats and Republicans to get progress made in Washington, and that's what Tom Perez can do. So I think the testimonies you're hearing today is the exact type of reason why the Senate should allow an up or down vote, give President Obama his team, and in Tom Perez you'll have someone who will advance progress and bipartisan compromise, which is needed in this environment.
And Senator, you mentioned that that there is support, there's strong support for Mr. Perez in Maryland. But what do you think is the real reason, I guess, if that Senate Republicans are opposing his nomination at such a volume? I mean, what are they seeing? You mentioned the IG report that basically found that he had improved things at the Civil Rights Division. So what do you think is their real motivation?
Well, I wish I knew. I really don't understand their concerns. I've listened to them. I've talked to many of the members. I really don't understand why this nomination would be highlighted for opposition. Knowing Tom, his character, his background, knowing his integrity, knowing his commitment to public service, knowing how he took on an incredible challenge in the Department of Justice and responded in a very positive way. So I am puzzled as to why his nomination wouldn't get not only be brought up promptly, but get a strong bipartisan support.
Great, thanks.
And again, star and one to ask a question. We'll go next to the side of Catherine Poe with Washington Times. Go ahead, your line's open.
Hi, this is Catherine Poe from Washington Times Communities. Senator Cardin, what's the possibility of a block by a Republican senator? Because I've heard that this is probably the most criticized nominee this term since Hagel. Does there look like a possibility of a block?
Well, explaining the procedures of the Senate, and it's very difficult to explain how the Senate operates, but any senator could delay the consideration of a nomination for a period of time, which would then require the leader to file a cloture motion. And as we saw in Secretary Hagel's confirmation process, it took 2 votes before the cloture motion was in fact passed. So it is very conceivable that this nomination vote could be delayed because of an individual senator putting a hold on it. But ultimately it'll come to the floor with a cloture vote, and then each senator has to decide whether they're going to participate in a filibuster on this nomination. And I would hope that even those senators who may vote against him would vote for cloture to allow an up or down vote on the floor of the United States Senate. And we will be working very hard on that. I would also hope, quite frankly, that each senator, if they look at the record here, that Tom Perez would enjoy a much stronger vote than 60 votes that are needed for ending filibuster. But in any respect, we would hope that the overwhelming majority would say this is not appropriate to delay this nomination. Let's have an up or down vote.
Okay, thank you.
Again, star and one to ask a question. We'll pause a moment. We have no additional questions.
Well, let me thank again. I really particularly want to thank Champ and John and Steve for being on this call. I know all three of them, and they are strong advocates for the views that they believe in. And I really do appreciate you being willing to step forward and saying that the Senate needs to carry out its responsibility and have a vote on Tom Perez. And I thank all of you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for including us.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.